Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tom Van Der Rostein, and I serve as the president of the Louisville Forum. We meet on the second Wednesday of every month at Vincenzo's Restaurant. The Louisville Forum is a nonpartisan political issues group founded in 1984. The Forum hosts debates and discussions of contemporary and sometimes controversial public policy issues that affect the greater Louisville community. Although we may take up issues that have a national interest, we try to highlight the local perspective. For more information on the Louisville Forum, our programs, or to make reservations, please visit our website, louisvilleforum.org, or on Twitter. Our topic and speakers today are Louisville's homeless crisis, what needs to be done. Louisville's homeless crisis has been front and center in the news this year with an increasing homeless population and the removal or relocation of different homeless encampments. Our moderator today is Louisville Courier-Journal columnist Joe Gerth. This month marks 2 years since Joe became the Courier-Journal's Metro columnist. His byline has appeared in his hometown paper for 30 years, from the neighborhood section to 10 years as chief political reporter. Last fall, one of Joe's columns explained how Lexington addresses its homeless population. And we hope today's discussion provides Joe some good information for a future column. Please welcome Joe Gerth.
Thank you, and welcome to the Louisville Forum. As Tom mentioned, for the past year, the homeless issue has been front and center in Louisville. If you've ever driven past Jefferson Street down near I-65, you've seen homeless staying out on the street. They've expanded now. Homeless people are now living on Preston Street. If you drive through old Louisville, you see encampments, and it seems, if not in actuality, at least the impression is that the problem is growing. And it's a problem that is at least in part some of the more intractable issues that we face as a society: poverty, drug abuse, and mental illness. And so we've brought together today a panel of diverse experience in civic affairs, from nonprofits to private businesses, and government, who are working to tackle the problem in Louisville. Each of the panelists will make introductory remarks, then that will be followed by a discussion. I'll ask some of the questions, and then you, who I believe have cards on your tables, will submit questions, and we'll hopefully have a spirited discussion here. First up is going to be Natalie Harris. Natalie's been advocating for the homeless in a variety of positions for 25 years. Since 2010, she was executive director of the Coalition for the Homeless, the nonprofit organization that works closely with the homeless service providers in Louisville, civic groups, concerned citizens, faith-based groups, and local, state, and federal governments. She serves as co-chair of the Kentucky Interagency Council on Homelessness, and she is the secretary for the Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky. Natalie, welcome.
Hello, and thank you so much for this opportunity. I figured since I am representing the multiple homeless agencies in our community, and there are over 30 professional agencies throughout the city who serve our homeless brothers and sisters and fellow citizens. But in addition to that, if you haven't witnessed, along with those homeless people who are on the streets, we have thousands of people in our community who go out as volunteers to help the homeless in the city, just as something they do because they feel it in their heart that they need to help and do something. So what we do at the Coalition for the Homeless is try to coordinate those efforts. Another thing that we do is we try to keep up with the numbers of homeless people that are in our city, and I'm excited to say that you're going to be the first group to hear. Yesterday we ran the numbers for 2018 of the number of people who are in our database, which means they were either at a homeless shelter or service agency, or were found by a homeless outreach program on the streets and were entered into our homeless database. And I think you'll all be surprised, as I was, to find out that that number actually went down a very small amount from last year, so it was 6,344 people. At the same time, for years, I have talked about the fact that we have two very distinct, and it's not just Louisville, throughout the country, we have two very distinct groups of homeless people. For the most part, you will see homeless families and individuals who are people who are right on the cusp of being able to pay all their bills and to be able to do what they need to do to take care of all the issues with their families. So all it takes is one hospital bill, one car breaking down, one emergency that sends that family into a tailspin of trying to decide this month which bills am I going to pay so that I can leave something not paid, and then I have to chase that for the rest of the year because every month now I have some debt that I can't keep up with, and I'm trying to get to where I can finally catch up and start over again. And that is because we have a great number of people in this city who are still making minimum wage or at least below $10 an hour, which if you look at minimum wage in our city would mean that you're making about $15,000 a year. So if you stop to think about what you could do with $15,000 a year, paying rent alone would be extremely difficult. And that is the majority of who our homeless population is and throughout the country. But there is a second group of people who and the federal government has defined as chronically homeless. So those people are homeless for long periods of time. They usually have multiple issues that they're dealing with: mental health, chemical dependency, other family issues that they are having to address. And those people tend to stay homeless in our community. We have found here in Louisville, on average, about 4 years. So that means some people are not homeless that long. If our average is 4 years, we have people who are homeless for decades in the community because of these multiple issues they're dealing with. And I'll be very interested, we do not know this yet, but my guess is from seeing who is living on our streets most recently, that percentage has actually increased in our city. I think I would not be providing big news to this room or anyone else in Louisville by saying that we have a drug crisis right now in our community. And so we are seeing a larger number of people who are those folks that are stuck and can't get through the system and get to stability, who have a drug addiction, people that you would not predict would end up on our streets. They are the children of your friends. They're the grandchildren of your friends. They're people who grew up in a middle-class setting, but then because of this addiction have ended up on our streets. We also are seeing a large increase in the number of people with severe medical issues that are living on the streets. So people who have recently been hospitalized, have colostomy bags, have other major medical issues, and are sleeping outside. And so we know that we're seeing more intense issues that people are dealing with, which we think is keeping people on the streets longer. And then the final thing is, I think it has become much more accepted, okay, for people to feel like I can stay right out here in the open. I feel safer here. I'm less likely to have to deal with rodents or other people in a hidden location that may want harm against me. And so if I stay right out here in this well-lit area where there's lots of other people, I may be safer in my community. So I think even if the number has not increased, I think it is much more visible to all of us. And so I think in the last few years, I, as an advocate, have really changed my tune about what I think we need here in the community. I have for years pushed, and I will continue to push, for more permanent housing for people who make very little and are going to need a subsidy to be able to afford their housing. And our city has invested in that, and I hope that they will continue to do so. But at the same time, for the first time in my career, I also feel like we need more emergency shelter and lots of different options in our community, and that we're going to have to take some of the money we would have used for permanent housing and invest that in shelter so that we can say as a city that everyone can come in if they choose to. And we can't say that right now. We have 70 families on a waiting list to get into shelter, in addition to the more visible crowd that you can see. So that would be the one thing that I would ask for. I do want to also, before I let others speak, just let you know about a couple things that are happening. Eric may talk more about what the city, and Barbara also will probably talk more about what the city is doing, but they are investing in several different projects that will allow us to see what works during these winter months. And already we know that it is starting to work. I heard yesterday or day before there were 93 people who came into the new low barrier shelter that had been sleeping outside. So we all wondered, if we build it, will they come? And it sounds like yes. I think we will learn a lot over the next few months about what works and what doesn't work there. In addition to that, the city has funded a study by U of L that will look at the best practices across the country and then how to apply that here in Louisville. What are all the things we need to do if we really want to address the issue of street homelessness in our city? And that will include looking at shelter options, but it will also look at law enforcement, how we deal with homeless people in our community, and some of the root causes that we're seeing that cause this homelessness. So those are the things that I would begin with, and I will let the others speak and then open it up to everyone.
Thank you, Natalie. Next up, we have Eric Friedlander. Eric is a 30-year veteran of Kentucky state government. In 2017, he was named Metro Louisville's first Chief of Resilience and Community Services. He leads the city's efforts to help prepare for, withstand, and bounce back from chronic stresses and acute shocks. He also leads the agencies responsible for anti-poverty programs in Louisville Metro government, like the Neighborhood Place, Meals on Wheels, and other collaborative programs with partners ranging from the Metro United Way to the Coalition for the Homeless. Eric, welcome.
Thank you for having me today. Natalie, thank you for describing the population that we're seeing in terms of who is actually homeless on the street. I think oftentimes we talk about the homeless, and really there is no such thing. Everyone has a very unique situation as to why they end up. No one is a 10-year-old and decides, oh, I want to grow up to live under a viaduct. That just doesn't happen. So these are people who have experienced probably an excessive amount of trauma. We know that there's, as we see on the streets and we see in the homeless shelters, and you talk to people who are there, they have experienced usually something very traumatic in their childhood. Veterans with post-PTSD, we see that trauma, in terms of a root cause, is one of the driving forces behind who we have on the street, including increased drug use and things like that. So that is all very true. And just as there is not the homeless, I will tell you there is not the solution to homelessness. What we have in Louisville and what we are experiencing is we have a continuum of care, 30 different providers who approach things differently. You can go to a Salvation Army that has one approach. You can go to Wayside that has another approach. No approach is right, no approach is wrong, but everyone's a little different in terms of how they approach. Even the street outreach groups, each one is unique in terms of how they interact with folks who are homeless and how they interact with people who are in camps. It is all very different. So about last year, a little more than a year ago, this city went in and cleared out a camp. No notice. People lost their possessions. And these are people who lost possessions that are the last vestige of when they were housed. So that was wrong. And in response to that, we started this homeless encampment task force, and we've been meeting for about a year, and folks are like, well, what on earth did you all do? And I'll tell you what we did. And it's laid the groundwork for what we're doing today. So sometimes the street outreach people would call the Coalition for the Homeless, the Coalition for their shelters, and the shelters weren't working right because everybody the street outreach folks saw had gone through the shelter system and ended up outside. There was but there was enough enmity out there to really prevent us from working together well and communicating well. I will tell you that the encampment task force, we were all in the beginning very polite and very nice to each other and being very sensitive. That ended a few months ago. But that was fantastic, right? Yes. That was great because we could start having the real discussions. And out of that really contentious, our last meeting was very contentious, out of that contentious meeting came the action from Metro Council.
Right.
To appropriate really what is the first funding for people, Metro Council, Louisville funding, for really addressing the street, the unsheltered, the encampments, the folks who are there, to look at our continuum of care, sorry to use the bureaucratic language, but that array of services, right? And we did discover there are pieces that we are missing, and there will be pieces that we are still missing. Our emergency low barrier shelter, really what that means is you can go in intoxicated, right? So none of the shelters in Louisville, with the exception of Healing Place, would allow anybody to go in intoxicated. There's a banned list. So even on White Flag nights, there were people that couldn't get into shelters because they'd acted out before. They'd gotten in a fight, they'd yelled at somebody, they'd used while they were in the shelter. There was no place for them to go on the nights when it dipped to below 35 degrees, technical term, but when it started to freeze. So Wayside stepped up, and they're actually providing a low barrier shelter. And as Natalie said, we weren't sure people were going to go into Wayside. Some people have had bad experiences there. We didn't know if people would go back in, but they have. So that's been a very positive piece. We knew we were missing. You all go down Jefferson Street, you see the piles of stuff, right? So one of the reasons people don't go in is because they don't have any place to put their possessions. They're worried that somebody's going to steal it. They're worried that it'll get lost on the street. So we're working on coming up with a solution for storage for individuals so they can put their last possessions of that reflects when they were housed. So that's a piece that we hope to get up and running by the end of the month. So that we knew that was a piece that was missing. You heard Natalie talk about we didn't have enough family shelter beds. We don't have enough family shelter beds. That's a piece of what we're trying to address in what we're talking about with the funding from Metro Council is how do we increase the number of family shelter beds, and how do we encourage that? So, and the Healing Place is going to expand, which they were already planning to do, but now they're going to expand as well to include some more of those kind of low barrier beds. They're also, frankly, probably the only place that folks who are coming out of the judicial system with sexual offenses can go, because those aren't necessarily populations you want to mix. So we're working on that. Hopefully we'll make strides, and I think we will. I will also guarantee you, as I've tried to guarantee everyone, we will make really, really big mistakes. And there will be some disasters. I'm sure of it. That's the only thing I can assure you of today. But we'll learn. And that's the important thing, right? The important thing, and what the mayor always challenges Metro employees about is if you're going to fail, okay, but learn from when you make the mistake. We failed at 12th Street 16, 18 months ago. We're learning. And we're going to try to live into what it means to be a compassionate city. While balancing the rest of Louisville's wants. You live in a neighborhood next to a camp, that's not the most comfortable thing to live with. So how do we balance and how do we make sure that people get services so that they can get better? The street outreach folks say it really well. They go out, they serve people in these camps, and they say, these people, we work with them, we have relationships, which has been very important to connect them with case managers. That's made a huge difference. But we're just trying to keep them alive to the point where they can say yes to services. And that if you all have any relative that's gone through substance use, that's gone through the cycle of addiction, they're not ready till they're ready. You can't force somebody into treatment. It doesn't work. So you have to wait, you have to be there at the point when they're ready to say, okay, this is too much, it's time to change. And if we're there and we can offer services, I think we'll have an impact on the number of folks we have on the street. That's what I hope. I hope we continue to learn. And I thank you all for your attention to this issue. This has been something that's been kind of boiling in Louisville for a long time, but the media has been fantastic, and really the community's been fantastic. How do we hold ourselves accountable for being who we want to be? So thank you for that.
Thank you, Eric. Next up is Rebecca Matheny. Since 2014, Rebecca has been the executive director of the Louisville Downtown Partnership. After beginning her career in affordable housing, she switched her focus to downtown Louisville in 2007 when she joined the Downtown Development Corporation. She's responsible for supervision of downtown development, planning, and plays a critical role in downtown business attraction, development and retention efforts, serving as a liaison between the public and private sectors. Rebecca, welcome.
I'm hoping that Eric doesn't think his first big mistake was inviting me into these conversations, 'cause I have a strong opinion from time to time. So first of all, we run the Downtown Partnership, and that's sort of a strategic component, but we also have an operational component, which is really how we are on the front lines of this issue. We have a clean and safe team. You probably have seen the ambassadors. And then very recently, we expanded the management district to include the overpasses that were the result of the Bridges project. So our guys are down in those areas where all those people are every single day. You know, downtown is always going to have a high density of use. So we've been dealing with panhandling, homelessness, and street behavior for the entire history of downtown, and this is certainly a national issue. I think Natalie's point that it's becoming more visible is something that we've seen in downtowns and in urban cores all across the country, so my colleagues are struggling with this. Nobody thinks they do this well. Some people think they get certain things right, but there's not a city in the country that thinks they've got this, a really good handle on this. So the first thing, philosophically, downtown is for everybody. And that's very important to us at the partnership. And we place a really high level of emphasis on treating people with dignity. And that's all folks, whether it's folks that we encounter on the street or whether it's a business person with incredibly difficult to hear concern. Either they've had a lack of awareness of the issue, or they have a misunderstanding of some of the issues, or a judgmentalness about the issue. Our job is to treat everybody's opinion with dignity and make sure that everyone's experience of downtown is as positive as it can be. Part of our role is also advocacy for the private sector and the business community. So I have a little bit of a different perspective here, including property owners, retailers, restaurants, and hotels. And certainly what we're hearing from the business community is increasing levels of concern about aggressive behavior, sharp uptick in shoplifting, extensive loitering, vandalism, and just the visual impact of having folks in distress on the street. We're also hearing the impact about that on the financing of new projects and about the choices of business to locate and relocate. Of course, these things are not the result of homelessness per se, but they get lumped together by people linguistically as homeless issues, when what people are really talking about is a whole host of issues, as Eric and Natalie mentioned. So one of our important roles is education and outreach. So we try to unpack the conversation. So chronically homeless, transitionally homeless, but also we talk about panhandling and the fact that not all panhandlers are homeless. We talk about mental illness. We've talked about drug and alcohol dependency. The other deeply concerning thing that we're seeing in the urban core is an uptick in trafficking. And so that has become part of our conversation as well. The other thing that we try and do very much is manage public expectation about what LMPD can and can't do. It's much easier for me to explain what struggles the police have in terms of what they're allowed and not allowed to do, and there's a lot of fundamental misunderstanding about that. Councilwoman Smith was a lead in that our panhandling ordinance we had was unenforceable, and so luckily Metro Council took a very proactive step to clean that up so there's less confusion out there. But we really try and do, again, that sort of managing expectation of also the realities of what the social service agencies face And really that life in a vibrant downtown means the presence of a wide variety of people and behaviors, some of which are going to make a lot of people uncomfortable, and that's okay. So we really try and do education. We also try to help people understand what they can say no to, because that's a hard conversation for some people, to say no to a panhandler, even though it makes them very, very uncomfortable. So we really try and work on that. And that said, people need to feel safe. I think in our mind, a couple of the major issues are really regaining control of the right-of-way. We need passable sidewalks. Sidewalks are for pedestrians. That important connection of downtown east is something that we're really struggling with that large presence. I think there are great strides being made. These people do wonderful, wonderful work, and our social service agencies are great partners. We're also the boots on the ground, and it's interesting because my ambassadors, largely, some of them have come out of the Healing Place, and some of them have come out of Wayside. So I think they do a great job of kind of having a real strong street sense, but also working with our partners in the social service agencies to try and get folks help. We also have direct access to this great model called the Living Room, which gives people a place to go that's not jail or the hospital, and gives them a chance to really, again, be treated with dignity and respect. So we do the operational stuff, and Barbara does the fun stuff, so.
Thank you, Rebecca. Next, we have Barbara Sexton Smith. She's a longtime civic and business leader. She was elected to the Louisville Metro Council in 2016. The 4th district that she represents includes the Central Business District, as well as Russell, Butchertown, Smoketown, Shelby Park, Phoenix Hill, and parts of Portland. So a lot of this comes in her area. Also Merriweather, Irish Hill, Germantown, Paristown Point. So it's just about anywhere within a fairly short distance of downtown she represents. She's former president and CEO of the Fund for the Arts, and she's the chief liaison for the Compassionate Schools Project. She's also been one of the Metro Council members who's been leading this discussion in the Metro Council. So, Barbara, welcome.
Thank you. Well, it's an absolute honor and a pleasure and a joy to be with you all today. And more importantly, it is such a humbling and honoring experience to get to serve as an elected official in Jefferson County. I happen to think this is the epicenter, not of our area and our Commonwealth or our nation. I think that Louisville, Kentucky is the epicenter of the world. Why not? We need to claim that. I believe that we have similar challenges as communities all across this great earth has, and we need to be the urban laboratory and work together on complex challenges to create common sense solutions. So Eric alluded to the Homelessness Encampment Task Force that has been formed in November of 2017 by Mayor Fisher. And you may remember, it's very important to understand where we've been and how we got there and where the journey started, so we don't end up in Abilene and everybody says, if you're familiar with the Abilene paradox, and everybody says, how in the heck did we get here? Well, remember when Mr. Peevler, with the gentleman who lived in the wheelchair downtown with an amputated leg, and we all know the rest of the story. All I have to do is tell you that much. So Mayor Fisher stepped up immediately, formed the Homelessness Encampment Task Force, and Councilman Bill Hollander and I were fortunate enough to be asked to serve on that. I mention that to you because that task force, since November of 2017, has gone through the exact first 3 stages that any group will go through. Those stages, as we all know, are forming, storming, norming, and performing. Eric, I remind you every time I see you, it's time to go to step 4, where we're actually performing with measurable results. You know, it's easy to look around this great city of ours and become enthralled with all the great successes. You know, in the last few years, we've had $14 billion of investment, economic development, created more than 72,000 jobs. More families than ever have been lifted up out of poverty, and much of that is thanks to Kathy Dykstra and the Family Scholar House, who's with us today. Give her a round of applause. However, not everyone is experiencing the great sense of being enthralled with the great successes in our community. My message today is to say that we must disenthrall ourselves and awaken our slumbering disquietude, and then and only then do we have a chance, if we choose to do that, is to be the compassionate city that we say we are, we want to be, and that many believe we already are. You never achieve success in the end. There's always more to do. This is a two-direction, not a two-way. It's a parallel path conversation to have. Social justice, economic development. Every conversation I have either gets in one lane or the other, or both, and understands that. I'm asking you, if you're in one of those lanes, try to at least understand the other lane, and then we can bust out and build a bigger highway, and maybe we'll have a third, fourth, fifth, and sixth lane where everybody is welcome to drive on the highway to success. I just made that up, Rebecca. Did you like that? Okay. I only have 45 seconds left. So, how did we get to where we are? I want to take you now to Washington, D.C. for just a moment and suspend your disbelief as we do at Actors Theater and the Commonwealth Theater of Louisville, bringing in my art background. Suspend the disbelief, go to Washington, D.C., and think about this. From a policy perspective, I bring you the message. I believe we are here today because of the many policy decisions that have been made at the federal level and then get made or reintroduced at the state level and then find them way into themselves into the local government, and then we all sit in this beautiful, stunning facility, Vincenzo's. I give Vincenzo's a round of applause. Has this gone missing on anyone, that we're having a beautiful lunch? I know it's not on you. To talk and have a conversation about those experiencing homelessness. 6 things, very quickly, at the national level and the federal level, the confluence of circumstances, the perfect storm. 1, laws that have created a severe shortage of affordable housing all across this nation, and most effectively in Louisville, Kentucky. We have one of the lowest affordable housing stocks in the nation, along with one of the highest eviction rates. 2, severe funding cuts for mental illness all across this nation and in our great Commonwealth. Wages, I say no more, $7.25 in one of my answers to your beautiful questions that are forthcoming. I'm going to talk more about that, and I'll tell you what I think the wages should be and why. 4, the opiate epidemic. 1980s, the Journal of Medicine, any physician in the room knows this. Pain was defined as a disease, and therefore it opened up a lane that only one group could get in, pharmaceutical companies. 5, not in my backyard, has permeated itself in every area of Jefferson County. I've seen it in my first 2 years on the council. I won't point out specifics right now. There have votes that have been taken in every area of Jefferson County with my colleagues that have said no to affordable housing in one way or another. That is not acceptable. And lastly, number 6, our laws as they relate to the criminal justice system. We must reform our criminal justice system. We must start at the federal level, filter down to the state, and then to the local. I will stop at 5 minutes and 57 seconds. I spoke fewer seconds than any one of the speakers. Those of you that say I always speak too long, thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for being brief.
Is that on camera?
And what we're going to do now is I'm going to start off by asking a few questions, and then we'll take some questions from you, the audience. And the first question has to do with something that Barbara touched on, and that is the lack of affordable housing in Louisville and the problems that we have with finding areas for it, and also finding people who are willing to invest in affordable housing. How are we ever going to get these families and other people into affordable housing if it's not there, and how are we going to get it built? And I'll let you guys fight over the microphone here.
Money.
I like listening to Barbara.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then I'll take the one-word answer, money, and work with that for a moment. So I think it's very important to understand how we got here. So if you go back to the year of 2008, speaking of policy, Louisville Metro Council, long before I was here, along with Councilwoman Dorsey, in 2008, the Louisville Metro Council voted to put $10 million a year into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So I thought, great at the time, and didn't give it much more thought until I was preparing myself for office and trying to understand the budget. And then I discovered, when I was looking to see how that 70 or 80 million dollars had been spent over the years, I discovered this. In 2017, you count the difference between '08, in those years, a total of $2.5 million had been put into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund from the Louisville Metro Council. That is completely unacceptable. And when I asked for reasons why, they're not even worth quoting to you today because they make no sense. And so Councilman Bill Hollander, as you know, in his first term, led the charge, and he had some folks in agreement, but not everyone. So when I joined him, we fought hard for it, and the full Metro Council, with a few exceptions, voted for fully fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So to your point, Rebecca, $10 million went into the budget for 2018, and $10 million is in that budget right now. In the last 4 years, Metro Louisville has, with taxpayer dollars, has contributed more than $40 million to affordable housing. However, that is a drop in the bucket to what is needed. So when you see that the Metro Council is going to have discussions as it relates to affordable housing, and it's been in every aspect of Jefferson County, please show up. Please call your council members. Please express your views. There's two reasons for everything in life: the reason people give and the real reason. When they tell you why you can't build here in my backyard and they give a reason, keep looking for why. So we do need more units.
Okay. The only thing I'd add to that, is absolutely and amen. But the other piece is this. The populations that we really started talking about today, those folks who have been on the street for an average of 4 years, they need a little more support than just affordable housing. They need what's called supported housing, and I don't mean it to be too wonky. I hope I didn't steal your wonkiness. But folks need help to stay in housing. When you've learned to live on the street, when you've learned how to survive on the street, and I wouldn't last more than 2 days. Talk about a population that's resilient, but we'll get there. They need some help because they're used to a different way of living and existing and thinking about, I'm only worried about my next 15 minutes. I'm not worried about next month or next year. That's a different mindset that folks need help with. As well as making sure that they have the money to pay the rent and things like that. So there are pieces that we need to add, and that really, most of the supported housing money comes from the federal government, could go through Medicaid, but I won't get too technical on you. But we need some more supported housing as well.
I also just wanted to build on what Councilwoman Sexton Smith said about the fact that we have to bring these two lanes together. And if we can't make affordable housing something that a developer wants to do because they also are going to be able to make a profit in it, then we aren't going to see the level of supportive housing built in our community that we want to see. I lived in Dayton for multiple years as a developer and was easily able to develop affordable housing there because the fair market rents were such that I could profit on or be able to cover my costs on those properties. The fair market rent is so low in Louisville, and it is due to the fact that we have segregated our community for so long and put all of our low-income housing in certain neighborhoods so that those are then the only neighborhoods that you can use your fair market rent housing in, and we continue to do it. We continue to give vouchers to people who can only use them in those lowest income neighborhoods, and then ask why did they keep choosing to live in those neighborhoods. So we have to figure out how to make this system work so that developers want to build and want to be part of our team.
All right, here are a few numbers to try to wrap your head around this particular conversation. So we've talked about fair market rate, we talk about minimum wage, we talk about area median income. So think about the data as it relates to Jefferson County. Right now, we know the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. People will tell you, well, nobody's paying that. Oh, yes, they are. They are paying that. There are people making that. You know some of them, you just don't realize that because they work 2 or 3 jobs making that rate. So here's what the picture looks like. You must make $15.79 an hour in Jefferson County in order to be able to afford a fair market rate apartment, two-bedroom apartment in Jefferson County. So if you're making minimum wage here, you have to have 2 full-time jobs. You think, well, there are not that many people making that. There are 254,000 people on the payroll in Jefferson County right now making below $15.79 an hour. I want you to think about that. I don't have the exact number of our payroll right now. I think it's in the neighborhood of 698,000. Someone can correct me on that. If you're thinking, well, she just said 254,000 below, how does that relate to the overall picture? It's in that area. So try to figure out where you're going to rent an apartment. When I was negotiating the first tax increment financing deal for an apartment complex at Shelby in Maine last year, it was a developer wanted to build 227 market rate apartments. And I said, oh no, not with tax incentives. You're going to have at least 27 affordable units. And I kept fighting for that number. And then one day, someone said to me, have you figured out what it is you're going to win if you win that discussion? You know what that rate would have been? $650 a month. I know a whole lot of people that cannot afford $650 a month. So I stopped that argument and I said, fine, if you won't build the total number of 27 units, give me the value of that, the value of 27 of those units. And that particular development was going to cost the developer $52,000 per unit to build. I'll let you calculate the math, what that check was going to be. I do know this, the developer backed away from the deal, but I'm not backing away from the challenge.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to open it up to you guys. Eric, one thing that we're looking at here is we're now spending $500,000 over the next 6 months to just do some very, very perfunctory sort of things to get people off the streets. What is it going to cost? How much is it going to cost for us to truly get a handle on this in a more permanent way and not simply treat the symptoms and instead of the basic causes, the root causes of these of folks being homeless in Louisville?
That's a really difficult question.
I figured it would be.
So most of the $500,000, $547,091.37. Most of that money will, if you look at it, most of that funding is going to really, if we're going to keep going, that's going to be ongoing. Most of the things that we're supporting will have to be ongoing in some way. There'll be some funding that goes to one-time pieces, but just those pieces, right? When you put that over a year, I mean, it just basically double it, and that's close. But then we know there are things that we're not addressing, right? One of the pieces that we talked about that we're not addressing, some of the transportation challenges, the folks who are out on the street with ostomy bags or in wheelchairs or who have significant medical needs. I don't know how to put a number on that. I honestly don't. So what does that look like? And who are the healthcare providers here who might say, well, what would it cost me to make sure that if I'm discharging somebody from an ER or a nursing home or out of a hospital and I'm not positive where they're going to stay, what would that cost to try to figure out how to support that on an ongoing basis? I think if we looked at, we're in Louisville Metro government, you'll hear more of this. We are dealing with trying to come up with how you pay for pensions, right? And how that is going to be a significant dollar amount next year. So how do we do that? So I think the answer lies not just with Louisville Metro government, but with community. Those thousands of people that go out and volunteer, the folks that have stepped up and have said that they would help us with some of the storage solution pieces. I think it will take everybody looking at what they can do. Barbara, you said it very well. If you're a business person, can you pay a living wage in this city? Are there pieces that we can do that will help the entire system. It's not just a government response. I've been in government for 30 years. I know what we can and can't do, and believe me, this is bigger than all of us.
A lot of good questions from the audience. Natalie, this is probably more directed at you, and that has to do with the percentage of the homeless population that chooses to stay on the streets and turn down opportunities for shelters and the like. Could you kind of talk a little bit about what that percentage is, just men and women who prefer to be on the street, and why, what that rationale is, that thought process, and also what can be done to help those?
Yeah, so I usually will say to people, I have never met anyone who, like you were saying at 10 or whatever, is like, I want to grow up to be a homeless person. But I do think that people make choices every day. And if you only have bad choices, you're picking between one bad choice and a worse choice. And so we do that. We set people up with two bad choices, one of which is to go into a crowded shelter and to be with a lot of other people, to figure out if you're safe in there, to figure out who else is in that room with you. And if you have an addiction, how long can I go without using and be in this space? Or if I have a mental illness, how long can I stay in this space and deal with all these other people around me? And so for some of those people, especially if the weather is nice, choosing to be outside may seem like a better choice than that. If we can offer people supportive housing where they have an apartment and a space of their own, almost all people will choose that. There are people who choose that option and then also struggle with how to manage their money. And so we do need more payees in the city who can help people pay their rent and make sure that's taken care of, and then have the rest of their money for how they choose to spend it. But I think if we have those housing options and payees, that I don't know of anybody who wouldn't choose housing over sleeping on the streets.
In the interest of time, we'll continue to have one person answer these questions, if that's okay. Best practices is the question. Are we looking for models used across the country? Example, Louisville's new provision of storage space to the homeless was done in Indianapolis in the 80s. What other good ideas can we copy? Anyone? Eric?
Sure. The storage piece is something that we're trying to copy and learn from. There are places where it's failed. And those places where it's failed, those pieces are not staffed. So part of the reason we're coming up in St. John's, thank you, Maria, is going to help us staff those places, because if you don't, if you just leave it open, then you're really not providing a secure storage for people's items, and people start to live there, and so the places get closed. I've actually been looking towards places like LA, where they have a tremendous homeless population, and so they have come up with some really bright ideas. So we try to look at other cities and what other cities are doing, but I think it's really fair. Nobody feels like they have this completely understood, and I think we're going to have to look for kind of the way we look for things in Louisville, right? A little bit gritty. We're going to try to figure it out the best way we can do and steal for whom we can steal from. But in the end, it's going to have to be a Louisville solution. And we're going to have to figure out what works here. And so there are lots of best practices out there. Low barrier shelter is one. Storage is one. There are pieces around permanent camps, which I'm not as comfortable with, but they exist. People who use storage containers. I mean, the list goes on and on and on in terms of what different churches do, and it is how do we begin to implement that here? So yes, the long answer when you wanted a short one is yes, we do look for best practices across the country.
A couple of questions having to do with just tips on how to handle panhandlers, whether you're sitting at the intersection and they come to your car, or you're walking down the street. Could maybe one of you guys just kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to take that one. So we really advise against giving to panhandlers. We have spare change boxes throughout downtown that are alternates. A lot of people don't feel comfortable. So we have been doing an education campaign with especially conventions. We get a lot of conventions of people who aren't used to being in cities. And it's a personal decision. You know, you get to make the decision you make. What I really think is important is treating that person, because they are a human being, like a human being. And what we've seen is that that kind of direct interaction, I'm looking you in the eye, I'm going to smile at you, I'm going to say no nicely, but I'm going to speak to you. I'm not going to pretend like you're invisible. And I think those are really important keys. I also think it's very important that if someone is aggressive, that you let LMPD know. People are not allowed to panhandle in private businesses, to sort of know. But they are allowed to ask you for money. This is a First Amendment protected right, the same way Girl Scouts can ask you to buy cookies. And the Jehovah's Witnesses can give out literature. So, it is a protected right, but these are human beings. And I think that is the key in terms of handling panhandlers and don't think that they're necessarily dangerous just because people have a natural kind of uncomfortableness around people who are different. I've had people in downtown tell me that they have been panhandled, and I'm like, well, did they ask you for money? No. What do you mean by that? Well, there's a guy sitting in a wheelchair down there, and he made me feel really uncomfortable. I'm like, that's not really panhandling. So I think it's that dignity piece that's really a key piece, and knowing that you have the right to say no, and that's just fine, as long as you're doing it in a kind, humane way.
The other thing I'll add to that is I used to be pretty soft touch, but working with the street outreach folks, they really convinced me, most of them, that I could be buying somebody's last figs, right? I mean, I'm probably not helping by giving money. So I have like bottled water in my car. In the winter, I have socks and hats and things like that, granola bars. There are things that you can give that will be helpful and actually keep people safe and hydrated and better able to cope on the street. So that's an alternate way to think about. You don't have to give money, and it's probably not a great idea.
I'm going to go to one along the lines of how we can help. Can you share more about the living room as well as resources that we can turn to in Louisville? Most of us, the questioner says, are uneducated, and some helpful websites would be welcome.
Why don't you do that? The coalition.
I don't know if I know that.
Like to tell the truth.
All right, so there seems to be some hesitancy up here. I'll start out, if we may have your permission, I'll make a couple of sentences, and if it makes you think of something you would like to talk about. So the living room model, in case anyone is not familiar with that model, we did a pilot program here in Louisville. It is in partnership with Centerstone. And this was a partnership where if the LMPD encountered an individual during the pilot phase that had a low-level nonviolent crime, or they were looking to possibly write a violation or possibly arrest for something on the street, and if that person was obviously trying to manage possibly mental illness or some sort of addiction or some sort of current state of intoxication or highness, then if the person agreed to seek some assistance in the moment and agreed to go with the police officer could have what we call a soft handoff. And they would drive that individual over to 7th and Magazine Street, go in the back door of the facility. You can go there. I ask you to go there in the evening and just drive by and see the bright blue light. It's about the color of the blouse that I'm wearing today. And that signals living room, knock on the door. From the time the police officer knocked on the door until the person was handed off and a description of the condition of the individual was shared, it was about 2 to 3.5 minutes versus the average 4 hours a Louisville police officer will spend if they choose to take an individual to the county jail to work through that. That was the pilot phase. What do we do about you and me and others that know someone that needs to have that kind of soft handoff and go seek help and assistance? We can do that now because the living room was fully funded by your Metro Council's partnership this last year, and you may stay in that space for 23 hours. There's a reason it gets classified as something else once you hit the 24th hour. You're not forced to do anything, but case management is there to help you connect with services you may need.
A couple of questions having to do, sort of a two-part question, and that has to do with children caught up in the homeless crisis. Two things. One is, can someone shed a little light on percentage numbers, how many we're talking about? And number two, in terms of your policies and decision-making and so forth, where do they play into this thing?
I didn't understand the beginning of that.
Children, how many children do you think are a part of that?
Oh, so we actually do know that we have about 850 homeless children well, I should say young adults and children. So about half of those are children under the age of 18, and those young people are served at the YMCA Safe Place. And the other half are 18 to 24-year-olds, which is a number that has greatly increased. It's not at the levels it was 5 years ago when the economy tanked and young people were really, really struggling. But we still would not like to see 450 18 to 24-year-olds out on their own, many with their own babies at this point, who are living in our shelter system. So that is one positive thing, and so it sounds like I get to leave us on a positive note. The city received $3.4 million to address young adult and youth homelessness in the city, and we're hoping that the submission we submit on Friday will be approved as our final plan, and we will start allocating that money out to agencies throughout the city. And we hope to be one of the first cities in the country that will end young adult and youth homelessness here in Louisville.
I think we're about out of time, so I'll turn it over to Tom.
Thank you, Joe. First off, I'd like for everyone to give this panel a big hand. I think it's been a great program today. Today, we're starting a new tradition. Normally, we've given out mint julep cups and goblets in the past. The board has decided that we're going to contact each of these speakers, and in the future, each speaker will be allowed, we will make a contribution to a charity. We will give them a list of charities, and they can designate what charity they want to give their gift to.
I want mine to go to the Coalition for the Homeless.
Ditto.
There you go. A little bit of housekeeping before we leave today. Our next meeting will be our annual dinner, which will be held on Wednesday, February 20th. Make sure you mark that on your calendars, which will be at Noah's Event Venue, which is located at 1245 Plantside Drive. The speakers for the event will be a rare dual appearance of both U of L President Neeli Bendapudi and UK President Eli Capilouto. And of course, we will also present the 2019 Fleur-de-Lis Award winner prior to the program beginning. There will also be, this year will also be an opportunity to view the U of L Syracuse game. We are aware that it's going to begin right after the program. And then we will make a space and have bartenders available for those who want to stay and watch part of the game if they don't want to miss any of it. Reservations may be made online for the annual dinner at louisvilleforum.org or by calling our voicemail at 329-011. Thank you all again for attending, and remember, be nice to people.